It was 10 degrees C on Christmas Eve, and my dad shoved me outside like I was nothing. One second I was at the dinner table, the next I was standing barefoot in the snow because I talked back. I watched them open presents through the window while my fingers turned numb and my breath vanished in the cold. I told myself it couldn't get worse until the headlights of a black limo cut through the storm. A woman stepped out, her silhouette sharp against the snow. My grandmother. The billionaire no one ever told me was still alive. She looked at me shivering, then at the house and whispered one word that shattered everything I thought I knew demolish. This is the night everything broke, and the night my life finally started. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you're new here, please hit subscribe. It means more than you think, especially to someone who grew up believing no one ever listened. My name is Axton Vale, and this is what really happened. The wind on Iron Hollow Ridge cut through my clothes like it was punishing me personally. Montana nights were already brutal, but Christmas Eve at nearly 10 degrees C felt like the world itself wanted me gone. I stood on the back porch of the Vale house staring at the warm glow bleeding through the kitchen windows while the cold gnawed at every inch of my skin. My breath came out in sharp clouds, each one a reminder that I was on the wrong side of the door again. 15 minutes earlier, I'd been sitting at the dining table trying to keep my head down while Dad launched into his annual performance. Griffin Vale, local business hero, serial perfectionist, and expert in breaking his son down, had taken one look at the grease on my work jacket and said, "This is what you've become, Axton. A 30-year-old failure who can't keep a real job." I'd snapped. Not loudly, not disrespectfully, just finally honest. At least I work, Dad. At least I don't pretend to be someone I'm not. His face flushed embarrassment, turning into rage within seconds. Sable, my stepmother, placed a manicured hand on his forearm and whispered, "He's ruining Christmas again, Griffin." Jackson, my younger brother, golden child of the Vale dynasty, chuckled under his breath. Classic Axton. Can't even show up to dinner without embarrassing himself. That was all it took. Dad grabbed my arm, yanked me up from my chair, and marched me through the kitchen. The anger rolling off him was so hot I could feel it even now in the freezing dark. He shoved me out the back door, tossed my jacket onto the steps, and turned the deadbolt. Just like that. No second thought. No hesitation. Merry Christmas, son. I'd stood there stunned at first, my mind refusing to accept what had just happened. But reality hit fast when the cold began seeping through my socks and thin shirt. Through the window, their laughter drifted out. Sable clapping her hands as she unwrapped a necklace, Jackson tearing into some expensive gaming setup, Dad raising a glass like he'd earned peace. And there I was, frozen, locked out of my own childhood home, watching them unwrap presents like a stranger. I don't know why I kept coming back every Christmas. Maybe hope is a stubborn thing, refusing to die even when everyone around you tries to crush it. I hugged myself tighter, trying to keep the cold from crawling deeper into my bones. My vision blurred with a mix of wind and humiliation when suddenly a pair of blinding headlights cut through the swirling snow. A black limousine. Glossy, unfamiliar, out of place in this rural mountain town. It rolled to a slow stop right in front of our gate. I squinted through the snowflakes, heart beating faster. I'd never seen this car before. Never even seen a limo on Iron Hollow Ridge. The back door opened. For a second, all I could do was shiver and stare, breath caught halfway in my chest. Could tonight get any worse? Or any stranger, I whispered to myself. The limo door swung open and a tall, silver-haired woman stepped out as if the blizzard itself parted for her. Snow clung to her coat but didn't dare settle on her posture, upright, unshaken, regal. Her eyes scanned the yard until they landed directly on me. Axton. My name. Spoken with certainty. Spoken like she'd been waiting years to say it again. I froze, not from the cold this time. I hadn't heard that voice since I was 8 years old. Rowena. My voice cracked around the name. Rowena Sterling, my grandmother on my mother's side. The woman my dad insisted was gone dead or unfit depending on what story he felt like telling that year. The woman whose name was banned in the Vale House, whose blood ran in my veins, but whose existence had been erased. She walked toward me, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the dark. When she saw my trembling hands and snow-dusted hair, something changed in her expression, ice melting into fury. "What did they do to you?" she asked quietly, but her voice carried the weight of a storm. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Her eyes slid past me to the warm, glowing windows where my family sat laughing. The anger that tightened her jaw was instant, raw, protective, terrifying. Then she said it. Words that made my breath hitch. "You never deserved this, Axton, especially not when you're the last rightful heir of the Sterling line." I blinked. Hard. What? But she wasn't done. "I've spent years trying to reach you," she said, her voice low. Letters sent back, calls blocked, addresses changed, every attempt erased. A cold spike of realization pierced through me, a different kind of cold than the snow. Dad had done that. He'd cut me off from her before I even knew I had a choice. My heart beat loud enough to drown out the wind as Rowena stepped past me, staring directly at the house I'd grown up in, the same house that had pushed me out into the snow without a second thought. Snow swirled around her boots as she lifted her chin toward her driver, a tall man in a black coat. Her voice was a blade, one single command: demolish. I stared at her, breath frozen midair. I wasn't sure whether she meant it literally or as an expression of rage. But then the faint sound of engines rumbled from down the hill, heavy diesel engines, followed by radio static, followed by rotating warning lights cutting through the dark. That's when I realized it. Demolish wasn't a metaphor, and whatever was coming was already on its way. Snow kept whipping across the driveway, gathering around the wheels of the demolition trucks that pulled in one after another. Their headlights cut across the property like searchlights bouncing off the metal barricades the county deputies were unloading. Within minutes, the quiet ridge transformed into a controlled operations site. Iron Hollow sheriff units parked in a tight formation. 2 SUVs marked with the Sterling Dominion crest rolled up behind them, and a man in a charcoal coat stepped out holding a thick folder of legal documents. Everything moved with terrifying precision, as if this moment had been rehearsed for months. Maybe it had. I stared at the scene unfolding, my breath shaking with each exhale. "Why are you doing this? How did you even know I was here?" I finally asked Rowena. My voice was barely audible over the engines. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed a hand on my shoulder, firm but gentle, and guided me toward the limo. "Get inside, dear. You're freezing." The warmth of the leather seats surrounded me, but my mind stayed locked on the chaos outside. The Sterling attorney approached the deputies with documents in hand. One of the officers looked toward the house, his face tightening with surprise. The attorney turned toward me through the cracked limo door. "Mr. Vale, under the authority of the Sterling Trust, this property is being repossessed. Your father has defaulted on a long-standing mortgage tied to Sterling land. This house is no longer legally owned by the Vale family." My heart dropped. Dad always bragged about owning every stone on Iron Hollow Ridge. I'd grown up hearing him claim he built this house with his bare hands, a symbol of his success. But now it wasn't even ours. He'd been living on borrowed land, borrowed money, borrowed time. The front door burst open. Sable ran out in her robe, screaming at the officers. "You can't just take our home. This is harassment. Griffin, get out here." Jackson followed behind, her phone raised, already filming. "Yo, does anybody know what's going on? They're taking our house. Someone call a lawyer." He turned the camera on himself, putting on the dramatic face he always used for his online followers. Even now he cared more about views than what was actually happening. Dad appeared last. His voice thundered across the yard the moment he saw the Sterling vehicles. "Turn those machines around. This land is mine. I'll sue every one of you." Rowena stepped out of the limo. Her presence alone silenced half the crew. Griffin froze like he'd seen a ghost. It's been a long time, Griffin. She said, her tone steady but edged with a history I didn't yet understand. You, he snarled. You have no right. You silenced me for 22 years, she cut in, and you siphoned sterling funds to prop up your failing projects. You kept my grandson from me, intercepted my letters, and forged documents tying him to your household, so nothing would reach him. You did all of that while pretending to be a respectable man. Griffin's face drained of color. Then came the denial, sharp and predictable. Lies. All lies. But his eyes kept darting to the deputies and the attorney men who weren't listening to him anymore. I watched my two worlds collide in front of me. The family I grew up with, loud and flawed and cruel, and the grandmother I barely remembered standing there with power purpose and a rage that felt like it had been waiting decades. My chest tightened. For the first time, I wondered just how many lies I had swallowed over the years. What else had Dad taken from me? What else had been rewritten? Then Rowena looked directly at me. You deserve the truth about your mother, she said. She didn't die the way he told you. The ground felt like it shifted beneath me. My mother's death was the one story I had never questioned, the one thing too painful to revisit. But now she was telling me it wasn't true. Before I could speak, the deputies finished taping up the property. A bright orange notice was stapled to the door. Sable screamed. Jackson kept filming. Dad tried to push past an officer and was immediately restrained. The house, my childhood home, was officially condemned. Rowena touched my arm. It's time to go. I stepped into the limo, watching through the tinted glass as the Vale house my entire life as I knew it was sealed off. For the first time I understood that walking away might be the only way forward. And now I had to decide whether I truly wanted answers, even if they destroyed every memory I had left. The drive out of Iron Hollow felt unreal, like someone had lifted me out of my life and dropped me into another man's story. Snow blurred into white streaks outside the window, and the leather seat was too soft, too warm, too unfamiliar. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from the cold anymore, but from everything I had just witnessed. Rowena sat across from me, studying me with an expression that was equal parts relief and heartbreak. You're safe now, she said quietly. Safe. I didn't even know what that meant anymore. We flew through the night toward Aspen, Colorado, where the Sterling estate loomed like something out of a world I had never belonged to. Massive iron gates opened without hesitation. The driveway stretched longer than the entire street I grew up on. The house itself, no, the mansion, rose behind the pines, glowing gold against the snowy mountains. I stepped out of the limo, feeling like an intruder. Inside, everything was polished stone, warm lighting paintings worth more than anything the Vales had ever owned. Staff moved respectfully around us, as if this moment had been anticipated for years. When we finally sat in a private study, I asked the question that had been burning through my mind since she appeared in Iron Hollow. Why did you stay away? Why didn't you fight harder to see me? She didn't hesitate. I did fight Axton. But every time I came close, Griffin threatened to report me for harassment, threatened to take you away, threatened the authorities with fabricated accusations. He told me he would have you placed in foster care if I tried to contact you again. My stomach twisted. He said, talking to you would ruin my life. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. He ruined it by keeping you from your own mother's family. I leaned back, breath trembling. Every truth she gave me carved deeper into the foundation I'd been raised on. Then she opened a locked drawer and slid a document binder toward me. When you turned 18, she said you were supposed to receive access to the Sterling Legacy Fund, a financial trust valued at more than $300 million. My mouth went dry. But you never came to claim it. The paperwork was returned to us as signed and completed, all of it signed by someone named G. Vale. I stared at the signature across the acceptance form. It wasn't mine, but it was a signature I had seen thousands of times on report cards, permission slips, tax forms. My father's. He had forged my name, stolen my inheritance, stolen my chance at a life beyond his control. The reality hit me so hard I felt dizzy. Every time I'd struggled, he'd watched. Every time I'd needed help, he'd let me fail. I had never been trapped by circumstances. I had been trapped by him. Rowena reached out, her voice steady. You were never meant to live the life he forced on you. And now that he knows I've found you, he will not sit still. As if on cue, her assistant hurried into the room with a tablet in hand. Ma'am, we have a security alert. Someone attempted to access old medical files belonging to Ms. Vale Axton's mother. And someone also tried to pull Axton's hospital records from when he was a child. My heartbeat stopped. Who? Rowena asked. The assistant turned the screen toward us. A security camera photo captured the man at the records office. Griffin Vale. Something inside me cracked. If he was digging into those files, then the story of my mother's death, the one he'd repeated my whole life, might have been a lie. I stood up, feeling the ground shift beneath me again. I need to know what really happened to her. Rowena nodded. Then we searched together. But you must understand, once we start, there's no turning back. I swallowed hard. I'm ready. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. St. Lupin Medical Center sat on the edge of Denver, a gray stone building that felt colder inside than the snowstorm outside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Kieran and I stepped through the sliding doors, each footstep echoing with the weight of answers I had chased my entire life. I'd imagined this moment countless times, imagined finding a neat, simple truth about my mother's death. But the air in that hospital felt heavy, like the walls themselves were preparing to break something open. We approached the records counter, and the moment the elderly nurse looked up at me, her breath hitched. Her eyes softened in a way no stranger had ever looked at me. My God. You look just like her, she whispered. You're 22 years too late, sweetheart. Her words sank into me like ice. Before I could ask anything, she motioned us closer, lowering her voice. You're looking for your mother's file, aren't you? I nodded. She typed a few keys, frowned deeply, then turned the monitor so I could see. A red stamp covered the screen from corner to corner. Sealed by court order. My chest tightened. Who ordered it? She hesitated only for a moment before saying the name I had begun to fear in a new, darker way. It was sealed by Griffin Vale. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Griffin had sealed my mother's medical records. Why? What was he hiding? The nurse's eyes darted around the room, and she slid a thin sheet of paper from her pocket. I shouldn't do this. But your mother was an angel, and what happened to her? It wasn't right. She handed me a faded photocopy, barely legible. It's all I had time to grab before everything got taken. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The intake notes were smudged, but one line was still clear. Trauma from blunt force impact. Suspected domestic assault. Not a car accident. Not a fall. Not bad luck. Violence. Suddenly, the memories of my childhood, the scratches on Mom's arms, the bruises she brushed off as clumsiness, her trembling smile when she said she fell again, all snapped into place like a nightmare I'd been too young to see. My voice came out hoarse. He did this to her. The nurse's eyes filled with sorrow. There's one more thing you should know. Someone witnessed what happened that night. A security guard. Name's Marcus Tiller. He retired years ago, lives near the Wyoming border now. He called asking about you once, but no one answered him. My pulse hammered. A witness. Someone who saw the truth. Someone who'd tried to help. I turned to Kieran. We need to find him. Before we left, I called Rowena from the hallway and told her what we found. She didn't sound surprised, only worried. Axton, this is where your father becomes dangerous. You're getting close to what he buried. She wasn't exaggerating. When we returned to the Sterling estate, Kieran met us at the gate with a warning. There was a car parked outside for half an hour. No headlights, no movement. Security traced the plates. North Star Inn. My stomach flipped. Another Vale company. Another sign my father was watching, waiting, hunting. Pack tonight, I told Kieran. We drive to Wyoming before sunrise. Because now I knew Griffin wasn't just hiding the past. He was willing to bury anyone who tried to uncover it. We left Aspen in the dead of night, the mountains towering above us like silent giants as we drove over frozen passes. The heater blasted on high, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every mile toward Wyoming pulled me deeper into a version of my family's story that terrified me. I wasn't just chasing answers anymore, I was chasing the truth about the man who raised me, the man who might have killed my mother, the man who had spent decades making sure I never learned the truth. By dawn, we reached a stretch of snowy flatland dotted with old ranch houses. Marcus Tiller lived in the last home at the end of a gravel road, a small wooden cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his expression collapsed into shock. "You're her boy," he whispered. "You look just like Lily." Hearing my mother's name spoken so gently nearly broke me. He invited us inside, and as we sat near a crackling stove, he began to talk. His hands trembled as he reached for a cup of coffee, but his voice was steady, too steady, like he'd rehearsed this moment for years. "I saw it," he said. "I saw what he did to her." My breath caught. He continued. "Your father pulled her out of the car, screaming. She begged him to stop. He shoved her hard. She hit the pile of lumber behind the maintenance shed. I ran toward them, but he threatened me. Said he'd have me locked up if I interfered. She was bleeding, but alive. He dragged her back into the car. Drove off. Every word felt like a blow. I forced out. She didn't die immediately. Did she?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "No. She made it to the hospital. She was conscious. She kept saying one thing over and over to the doctors and the nurses." He took a long, shaky breath before meeting my eyes. "She begged them to protect you." My throat closed up. She told them he couldn't control his temper, that she was scared what he'd do to you if she wasn't there anymore. Kieran and I sat frozen as Marcus continued. But then Griffin came. He claimed he was her medical proxy, pulled out paperwork, threatened a lawsuit. Within an hour, everything changed. Her chart, her diagnosis, the official report. I felt sick. "So the accident story bought and paid for," Marcus said. "The doctor who signed off on it. Well, you should hear this." He reached into an old metal box and pulled out a tiny recorder. "I made a copy before they erased everything else. Been keeping it safe in case you ever came." He pressed play. Static crackled, then a man's voice, shaky, nervous. "Griffin, I did what you asked. No one will question the file." Then my father's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Good. Because if anyone connects me to what happened, I lose everything. And that boy, he's mine to raise, not hers." My stomach lurched. And then, the faintest whisper. A woman's voice. Weak, fading, but clear enough to shatter me. "Don't let him near Axton. Please, Gus, save my son." My mother's last plea. Her final act, protecting me from him. Before I could fully process the moment, the back window exploded. Glass rained across the room as a rock thudded onto the table with a note wrapped around it. Kieran reacted instantly, pulling me low. Marcus peeked toward the woods outside. "They found me," he muttered. I knew this day would come. A shadow fled into the trees, someone moving fast, too familiar. One of Griffin's men. We didn't wait. Marcus urged us to go before more cars arrived. Kieran and I sprinted to the SUV, snow kicking up beneath our boots. For the next hour, we drove in tense silence, checking the mirrors, constantly unsure if we were being followed. The recording sat between us, heavy as a bomb. Every word I'd heard rewired something inside me. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't been weak. She had fought until her last breath to keep me safe from him. By the time Aspen's lights came back into view, I wasn't the same man who'd left. Rowena met us at the door, reading my expression before I even spoke. "It's time, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "for the world to know what he did." She nodded once. Then we prepare for the Sterling Dominion Gala. The night I was thrown out of my house in the snow, I was nothing but a son begging for scraps of love. Now I was a man with the truth sharp enough to end the Vale legacy forever. The night of the Sterling Dominion Gala felt unreal from the moment I stepped out of the car. The Denver Polar Dome glowed like a crystalline fortress under the winter sky, its glass panels reflecting lights from the city and the thousands of people flooding inside. Every major investor, political figure, and media network seemed to be in attendance. It wasn't just a corporate gala, it was a spectacle. A battlefield dressed in gold and champagne. Rowena's team had spent hours preparing me, fitting me into a tailored black suit, grooming every detail so I would walk in looking like what I truly was, the rightful heir of the Sterling bloodline. But beneath the polished exterior, my chest was tight. I knew I was walking into the night that would end everything I thought I knew about my family. Inside, chandeliers sparkled overhead as the orchestra played softly, yet the tension in the air was undeniable. Every step I took reminded me Griffin would not sit quietly while his constructed empire cracked apart. He would try to salvage something: his reputation, his control, maybe even me. Rowena whispered beside me, "Tonight we show them the truth. No more shadows." Her confidence steadied me, but a knot still formed in my stomach. It wasn't just fear of speaking in front of 1,000 strangers. It was fear of tearing open the last memory I had of my mother. A memory that was already fractured. We took our seats at the front and the program began. But just minutes into the opening remarks, a disturbance rippled across the VIP section. I looked up and there he was. Griffin Vale. He forced his way past ushers flanked by 3 lawyers in cheap suits, as if he could march in and reclaim authority just by pretending he still had it. His expression was tight, jaw-clenched, eyes darting until he spotted me. Our gazes locked. And in that instant, I knew the climax of this entire story had finally arrived. He intended to fight even now. When the host announced my name as the speaker for the future of Sterling Dominion, the room erupted in polite applause. I stood, walked to the stage, and stared out at the sea of expectant faces. I could feel Rowena's support behind me. I could feel Griffin's fury tearing through the room like a silent storm. I had a script prepared, but I didn't use it. Instead, I began with the truth. "I'm here tonight not just as a successor," I said, voice steady, "but as a man who almost never knew the family he came from." The room quieted instantly. I grew up in a house where my mother's name was erased, where my grandmother's letters were burned before I could read them, where the truth was buried under fear. This past Christmas, I was thrown out of that home into the snow, into the cold, just for speaking up. The murmurs began soft but growing. I took a breath and pressed forward, and now I'm here to speak about everything that was kept from me, everything that was taken. The screen behind me lit up with documents, mortgage records, maps of the Vale property, evidence of fraudulent signatures, dates showing Griffin had used my identity to secure loans and access Sterling assets. A collective gasp swept the room. Investors snapped photos. Shares of my father's corporations would be tumbling before the night ended. I wasn't prepared for what came next. Griffin shoved his way onto the stage, grabbing a microphone. "This is slander," he roared. "He's been manipulated by that woman, Rowena Sterling, who has always wanted to destroy my family." He pointed at me. "You are my son. You belong with us, not with them. Sterling Dominion is a machine of exploitation. They've twisted you to steal what I built." But he didn't build anything. Not even his lies held shape anymore. I let the crowd settle, then said quietly, "If you truly believe that, then listen to this." With a nod to the technicians, I played the recording Marcus had given me. The room fell completely still. My father's voice echoed through the dome, cold, calculated. The doctor's voice trembled. And finally my mother's whisper, that fragile plea to save me. People covered their mouths. Others lowered their heads. The weight of her last words filled the room like a storm cloud finally breaking. Griffin staggered backward as if the truth itself had struck him. Before he could speak, one of Sterling Dominion's attorneys stepped onto the stage. "The physician involved in falsifying the medical report has confessed," he announced. "His testimony directly implicates Mr. Vale." The statement was read aloud. Griffin had paid to rewrite the cause of death-bribed hospital officials and silenced evidence of domestic violence. By the time they finished, Griffin wasn't just disgraced. He was ruined. Investors from North Star Inn hurried out. Photographers swarmed. Organizers asked security to intervene. Two guards took Griffin by the arms, escorting him out as he shouted incoherently, his final fragments of power slipping away. I watched him leave. For the first time, he looked small. Not a monster, not a tyrant. Just a man stripped of the lies he clung to. The gala resumed, but everything had changed. As the applause rose around me, as reporters scribbled notes and cameras flashed, I realized the end was close, but the aftermath would be its own battle. I stepped down from the stage knowing nothing would ever be the same again, and for once that felt right. The morning after the gala, my phone buzzed non-stop. When I finally opened it, the screen was flooded hundreds of messages, dozens of missed calls, and more notifications than I could process. News outlets from Denver to Montana ran headlines about the sterling heir confronting his father in front of the entire financial world. Clips of my speech and the audio recording had already gone viral. I wasn't prepared for fame, not the sensational kind, not the painful kind that comes from exposing your own family, but there was no turning back now. By noon, the Iron Hollow Sheriff's Department released a formal statement. Griffin Vale was being charged with forgery, financial fraud, intentional obstruction of justice, domestic violence resulting in death, tampering with medical evidence, and bribery of a healthcare professional. Hearing the charges read aloud felt surreal. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken. I felt balanced, like the world had finally acknowledged the truth I'd carried unknowingly for decades. Sable vanished from town within hours of the news breaking. Jackson tried to distance himself publicly but ended up digging his own grave when old videos resurfaced, clips of him mocking me, belittling me, laughing as I was thrown out into the snow. Brands cut ties. His followers turned on him. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to rescue him or anyone else. Some endings aren't tragedies. They're consequences. At the Sterling estate, Rowena stood beside me as she made an announcement she was transferring management of the Northern Mountain Division of Sterling Dominion to me. It wasn't just a title, it was a place to rebuild myself, my future, and the legacy of the family I was meant to have. With Kieran Holt as my senior advisor, we began structuring new initiatives. My first directive was personal, a fund to support children affected by domestic violence, and another to protect workers exploited by powerful families, both in honor of my mother. Later that week, Rowena's legal team uncovered something else. A letter. A letter my mother wrote to Rowena days before she died but was intercepted and never delivered. In her handwriting, she wrote about wanting to leave Griffin, wanting to take me and return to Aspen where she and I would be safe. She wrote about fear. She wrote about hope. She wrote about love. She never got the chance to send it. Reading it felt like someone had placed her hand in mine after 22 years. When I finally returned to Iron Hollow, the Vale house was gone. In its place was a vast empty lot covered in frost. I stood there for a long time, feeling the ache of my childhood and the freedom of my adulthood colliding inside me. I decided then to build something new on that land, a community center named after my mother. A place where protection, support, and dignity would always be given freely. Back in Aspen, life slowly reshaped itself. I shared dinners with Rowena, laughed more with Kieran, and found quiet moments to breathe again. For the first time, I felt like part of a family, one built on truth rather than fear. In the end, I understood something deeply. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. My journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth, honoring my mother, and taking back the life that should have been mine all along. And every time I look back at that freezing Christmas Eve, the night I was thrown into the snow, I realize it wasn't the night I was abandoned. It was the night I was found. In the weeks that followed, I found myself walking through a life that finally felt like my own. Some mornings I still woke up expecting the weight of the past to crush me, but instead I felt something unfamiliar: quiet, space, a kind of freedom I never believed I'd earn. And in that quiet, I kept imagining what my mother would have said if she could see me now. I think she would have told me that survival is only the first step and that rebuilding is where the real strength begins. I've learned that healing doesn't always come in dramatic victories. Sometimes it comes in the little choices: showing up for yourself, choosing truth over fear, refusing to carry the shame someone else placed on your shoulders. And while nothing can change what happened, I've accepted that the past doesn't have the right to dictate my future. I get to decide who I become now. If you've followed my story up to this point, I want you to know something. No matter how lonely your life has felt, no matter how many years you spent believing you were the problem, your story isn't over. And you deserve a chapter where you finally get to breathe. Before I close this final part of my journey, I want to ask you something simple, something human. If you're here with me listening to this, let me know by commenting, "Still here," or tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you realize to know that someone out there hears this story, not as gossip, not as entertainment, but as a reminder that truth matters and that people can rise even after being broken. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt even a small piece of your own life reflected in mine, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps stories like mine continue to reach the people who might need them most. Every listener, every comment, every shared moment creates a little more space in the world for honesty and healing. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for witnessing the truth with me. My name is Axton Sterling, and this is not the end of my story. It's only the beginning of the life I was always meant to live.